All right. So I'll make a start and kick us off. Again, welcome everyone. This session is being recorded, but you probably already know this. I think if you've joined us before. Today, we are uh, talking about quite a different topic, which is looking at connecting the academia and the industry and thinking about what how that is changing, in terms of evolving career paths for future engineering professionals. Um, and I want to frame the conversation going forward, and we will have, as usual, as per we came back to the previous format. We will have a presentation, technical presentation from Dr. Nidhi Nagabatla from the UN University, and then a case study presentation by Dr. Jason Blackstock, who is CEO of How to Change the World. And then we will break out to discuss the topics of today in a little bit more detail, and we will come back and close. Next, please. So for those of you who have not joined us before, this is part of a series of webinars on transforming engineering education. We would really appreciate if you can keep your camera on, because we really want to keep the session quite interactive, particularly in during the breakout session. Is if you can just engage with us as much as possible, that'd be great. Um, if you can introduce yourself in the chat and tell us where you're joining from, that's also nice, so that we know who's in the room. As I said, we're recording every session, and we're making them available on our channel and will be made available also to the participants. I know many of you have joined us quite a few times, but this is actually the value of this webinar series, is that you are actually attending as many sessions as possible, so that we can build that deeper engagement and relationship amongst the people who are part of this say, community of practice, where people are interested in this topic. And we will give a participation certificate to those who have attended over 70% of the sessions. There is an output at the end of the series, which we initially thought was going to be a practice guideline. It might be called something different, but we are already working on the output from that captures all the insights and the different case studies and presentations that were part of the series, and they will be discussed in the next and final webinar. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so for those of you who are joining us and would appreciate having captions, because your English is not your native language and you want some support, you can do so in Zoom. Just very quickly, I repeat this every time, but it's important to be a bit more inclusive. Click on the bottom bar on more, the three dots, then you select the captions, and then you select the language that you would like to see the captions in, and your speaking language. And you should be able to just see that appear on your screen. So this is we're almost actually at the end of this journey of webinar series. And this one is, in fact, the conclusive webinar is going to be on the 11th of December. And today we'll be talking about charting future career paths. I'm really glad to see a mix of people from industry and academia and civil society today, because the discussion will be even richer. So just to provide a few framing remarks, I wanted um, to share some findings from a survey that we undertook in 2023 in partnership with the World Federation of Engineering Organization, Young Engineers, Future Leaders. And we surveyed I think it's over 200 young engineers. And we wanted to understand how, their views, their perspectives on what their career, how they kind of felt about their career, particularly in implementing sustainable development practices. And part of the responses were actually also from their managers. So this dual perspective of the young engineers, there were about 3/4 of responses were from young engineers from across Europe, Africa, North America, South America, Asia, and Oceania. I guess all continents we had a representation, and their managers. So just to share a few key points, I think that would also be good to frame the discussion and to just give you a bit of data points. The young engineers, when asked about what they perceive to be the level of support in their own workplace to implement sustainable development practices, you can see there is a discrepancy in what the managers felt, how much support they were giving to the young engineers, and what the young engineers perceived as the support they were receiving. Um, and so young engineers actually felt that they were not really supported in terms of financial resources to actually upskill or to continue their professional developments, that their senior management support was lacking time allocation to actually upskill other than the day job of the projects that needed to be doing, and so forth. So that discrepancy of perception of what they felt and what their senior manager perceived in terms of support given. Next, please. And then this is a perception of challenges, as a young professional just out of university, and when they wanted to apply their, knowledge on sustainable development practices, and how many opportunities they actually had in the workplace to put into practice what they had, the knowledge they had, or the experiential learning that they could achieve through their education. Again, cost constraints, the solution of sustainable development or sustainability sometimes are all perceived as more costly, or there isn't actually time to optioneer in a project. When you kind of like you are in the middle of designing something, there isn't much time to explore solutions that are not the traditional ones that have always been put in practice. Um, the fact that the client doesn't necessarily ask for the solutions that are more innovative, or different from the practice, etc. And so you can see a couple of perspectives from a young engineer that says there are no green engineers to work with. I'm basically alone in this work. This is actually something that is emerging as a career, and therefore, there is that sense of there are very many, other young engineers that are trying to do the same thing. This was a couple of years ago. Hopefully now is improving. And then, a perspective from an engineering manager, that although there are some regulations, there is no major investment of state resources to implement and train young engineers to have a civil service career in the sector. So that's kind of, again, lack of resources and incentive. And that's why many engineers actually sometimes decide to change their career and actually go to other fields. Next, please. So this is topics of interest from, again, the young engineers surveyed. Those are the topics that they were most keen to upskill in: climate change adaptation, integration of nature-based solutions in the built environment, integration of socioeconomic environmental outcomes in design or outcome-based design, and so forth. So that just to give you a few data points there. And then and this is a great diagram that I want to kind of just share with you. When asked young engineers, we asked them, how have you personally benefited when you upskilled in sustainable development practice? You just gained new skills and being able to work in sustainable development. A lot of the people said that is the sense of purpose and the job satisfaction. So as they move to sustainable development and they're able to actually work on that type of projects, their sense of purpose, over 65%, like improved, and job satisfaction. And then, quite striking is that the fact that they're upskilling in that sector doesn't necessarily make a change in their salary or in terms of promotion. So I think, again, there is that element of, the aspiration of the people who are kind of starting their career and what it is that they're actually finding in the workplace. I'm sure, you know, there are people here from industry. You'll be able to comment on this and give us your views. But now I'm now I've seen that actually our first presenter joined us, and so but before we move to the presentation, we do have a quick Menti to get some initial feedback and interaction from the room. And we are asking you, what are the main barriers, in your opinion, the engineering graduates face when they enter the workforce? So if you go to the menti.com and enter the code or scan the QR code, we can get some initial input from you. And there is also a Menti link in the chat. Okay. Start looking at results. Okay. All right. So we asked, this is a ranking series of option. So the main barrier on top is insufficient practical experience as a main barrier that engineering graduates face when they enter the workforce. A siloed mindset are the top ones from people who've taken the survey. Low salary being the last. Interesting. Super important to attract and retain talent in the engineering profession. As the salary probably is not the main incentive. Lack of mentorship. Okay, all right, but definitely the top two are insufficient from this initial interaction with you. Insufficient practical experience and siloed mindsets. So probably doesn't allow them to develop and move across disciplines or departments. All right, so I am really delighted today to welcome two super interesting speakers. First is Dr. Nidhi Nagabatla. She's a friend, a collaborator, and a fantastic person to be talking about this topic. She is a senior research fellow at the United States Nations University, specifically in Institute on Comparative Regional Integration Studies. And she's also cluster coordinator at UNU for Climate Change and Natural Resource Program. She's a sustainability science specialist and a system analyst, and 21 years of experience working in this topic. She's led, coordinated, and implemented transdisciplinary projects in various geographical regions, leading research and capacity development initiatives, and a full list of other appointments and then interesting positions that you've held. Nidhi, we will share the bio in the chat. But then over to you now to give us your insights in this topic of charting future career paths for engineering professionals.
Thank you, Savina, for the kind introduction, and my apology in advance because I'm sitting in Starbucks, and if there is some background noise, then please bear with me. I'm in transit going back from COP to my duty station in Belgium, and I didn't want to miss this opportunity to share some of the common observations that I made along with Savina, where we had a number of sessions dedicated to technical education and especially engineering. And with that, maybe I take to share some of the slides wherein I have compiled the messages specifically from the past few activities related to research, teaching, and the research policy interfacing with specifically engineering in the center. And so I was given this topic, and I'm going to also give kind of a start with a news item that I read not too long ago, how industry partnerships and digital credentials can close the skill gap. So I'm really starting with the solution, and we'll go to the problem as we move on with the presentation. So I think it's good news that both in academia, also in the practitioners zone, the skill that is developed or being taught in the academic space and the requirements in the job space sometimes are very different. And I think these gaps are now being bridged through partnerships and very good partnerships. And I give some examples that may be of interest, how IBM is collaborating with the Northeastern University in the US, and also another one with Siemens with UC Boulder. So I think already there is some momentum to bridge this gap. And I think I wanted to start with a positive note. So I start with this kind of a partnership that is filling those gaps. But let's learn a little bit about the gaps. The engineering, the sort of trends in the engineering education, and I also teach civil engineering in a couple of countries, including in Canada and India, and some of the hybrid courses which have engineering as a secondary course in Europe. And I see that engineering roles are evolving. And I see it both from an academic perspective, but also from a practitioner's perspective, one who's working at the interface of science to policy or science to practice. And I see that engineering, and especially at the 75th anniversary of the UN, we had a dedicated report on how to involve engineers to steer sustainable development goal implementation. And I'm happy to share that report through Savina. And I think these emerging career pathways are increasingly dynamic and cross-sectoral. And that's also something that we heard a lot at COP. Engineers are just not constructing structures and built environment. They're providing solutions for sustainability challenges, be it through the nature-based solution gateway, be it through the nature-positive engineering gateway. So I think I would rather complement the work that ICSE has been doing in projecting and compiling these trends in some of their latest reports that was also presented at COP. I also, being as a trained engineer, I feel that engineering education can play a pivotal role in equipping the workforce that is brought to the market space at an annual level with because they have technical expertise. And when you have technical expertise, I think you get a bit of an adaptive mindset because you are very solution oriented. And this I'm talking from a pedagogic viewpoint. Engineering is a very solution oriented discipline. So I think that is an advantage that sustainability science and development challenges can use through collaborations, through co-creation, and through other cooperation pathways that may apply. And I think specifically for engineering scholars, I think they should be also prepared to work in complex, uncertain environments. The job market is not just you're given a task and you have to complete the task. You have to really have that mindset of finding alternative solutions. And I think this has been mostly now inculcated in the experiential learning that we are trying to now lobby with many leading academic institutions. And I personally teach at McMaster Canada, and we try to give some kind of an empirical experiential research assignments, like go and do a community research. Can your small innovation improve life of people? So also bridging the technology, science, and I would say social impact, if I may. And the fifth point, and I'll like to really keep it short, only 5 points as a take-away message, is that the cross-sectoral challenges, if you become a part of cross-sectoral challenges, I think that's a great learning experience to cultivate as a professional, because what your solutions can be then more holistic, integrated, and inclusive. You are in touch with reality because you have done a large part of education and learning through experiential learning, through internships, through assignment that really are created and constructed around social impact. So these are my learnings as an engineering scholar, but also what I teach for the past years. And maybe I'll go to, these are trends, but I'll go to some suggestions now. So I think a bit of, again, we see these trends, but in terms of suggestions, I think the engineering scholars should shift the mindset from a linear career trajectories. Like if you are a civil engineer, you really want to go into constructing a built environment or a built infrastructure. But I think are you able to do that by integrating pathways or paradigms that are being discussed at international multilateralism level to that holistic change? For example, I would say that when you talk about nature-based solutions, I mean, if you are given a task of constructing or designing a bridge, are you able to design a bridge that has the lowest biodiversity net impact? Are you able to design a bridge which will have lowest impact on the human capital? Nobody is dislocated. Nobody has to kind of lose their tenure to lands and livelihoods. So are you able to also think from that social perspective, or is this just a technical exercise? So I think that piece move beyond the technical to social impact thinking alongside, not substituting, but in tandem. I think a broad understanding of sustainability principles should also go into engineering education curriculum, and that I have experienced while teaching. When you give an assignment that are you able to understand the ecosystem laws or ecosystem services, that language is not yet common with engineering curricula. So bringing that sustainability language into curriculum setting, into assignments, is something that we suggest to academia and also institutions that hire engineers to different task projects and goals. And I think as a United Nations university, we are really positioning this argument at the center of multinational dialogues, multi-level engagements like we did in COP in the past 2 weeks. And I think we all have to, as stakeholders in this discourse or in stating this narrative, have to support this transformative collective effort by institutions. And as a UN agency, we are very much in working with the platforms like ICSI to steer education towards fostering collective future, and by which I mean, to simplify, having a more inclusive approach to design and implementation of solutions. And I think this is 12 ways, and this is oversimplification, but these are 12 ways by which you can do that. And this is the slide that I present to all my classes across all disciplines, because these are common principles. Enroll in fellowships. At United Nations, we have multiple fellowships, and so do you find so many across regions at the European level and in UK and many other regions around the world. Take part in number of student activities, especially that are tending to roles like UN model, and I'm sure many universities are already doing that. Cross-registered courses, again, super important. Even if you're a scholar of engineering, you need to understand psychological science. You need to take a class in behavioral science, because that's how you'll understand how your end users will use your solution. So I think those are other things that I would really suggest. Read the news, of course, not just on social media, but real news. Try to separate information from misinformation and disinformation. Participate in informational interviews. And I think this is something I've noted in the past years, that there are so many survey-based research assignments around the world. And I think some are openly advertised in platforms like LinkedIn, but if you're subscribed to even UN-based newsletters, you tend to participate in surveys. And that really opens up your mind, what kind of practical questions goes in designing a solution, because you yourself are answering these surveys. So if you find some of these surveys are interesting, then please answer them to ensure that other stakeholders use your insights, your perception to design their solutions. So it's very cross-connected world. This becomes important. And I would also say teach and mentor others, because knowledge has no bounds. I think as a professor, I learn a lot from my students, and I think that really is I think a blessing. So it's very bidirectional in academia, but also in professional environments like the UN. So I think looking beyond the hierarchical structure of learning and contributing to the knowledge spectrum, just keep an open mind to learning. And these are a couple of points. I'll not read them all, but happy to share the slides. One thing which I see, and might be super important for some of the scholars with us or practitioners with us today, is the science policy interface is now being discussed at the highest level of policy making. And there are a lot of national and international efforts in compiling the approaches or frameworks on how to do that. And if there could be learning for the engineering sector on how to bridge the engineering society and engineering policy gap. I think that would be something to look forward to as like a future paradigm to come up with the documentation. And I think ICSI is already doing a lot in that space. Again, I really like to compliment. I'm a scientist, so I really use the word science now as I've sort of graduated from being an engineer to a scientist. And I think also engineering is again a way of thinking. The solution-oriented mindset is inculcated through the academic setting, but the social impact is yet to make way into that mindset. So that plugging, we need to do that as we go along, either training or employing engineers and technical graduates. And there's a lot of learning from the Science Policy Gateway or Science Policy Interfacing. And you can see that it's also diversifying of the careers, not always seeking a job. I think most of the innovators can also be a job providers. And that's also we see is in the discussion of green jobs or greening the sustainability spectrum through innovation-based jobs, and technology engineering can be those sort of champions who are not only providing solutions but also providing income generation and livelihood and jobs to other graduates or other trained professionals from other disciplines. And I think this unique idea of broadening the technological or scientific knowledge to also see that science education, innovation that then plugs the scientific knowledge goes into policy discussions and lobbies. So as an engineer, if you are also taking some effort in maybe trying to distill, at least as a mental exercise, 5 key points, if you have to convince your municipality commissioner on how to design a stormwater treatment plant in your area, in your city, in your neighborhood. So you can't really present him equations. You have to present him with some kind of a pitch. So I think that kind of pitching exercise of translating, not generalizing, but translating a very complex pitch information knowledge into a policy relevant pitch is something that either you try to have some classroom exercise or try to join organizations that specialize in this domain. And again, this is again not for reading, but I've just summarized what I just said in the past slides as a take-home message, which you can read later at leisure. But I don't want to hold you for more than I should. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. I love the passion. I can hear the passion, from a practitioner, a scientist, an engineer. You actually are like you have multiple role, and you managed to kind of blend them so nicely. And thank you for this. Before we have I just give the microphone to our second presenter. We have another quick Mentimeter question again, so that we don't want to. And please, if you have questions for Nidhi, we will have them after the second presentation. But start typing them, and if you've got a question for Nidhi, and share them in the chat. So the second question that we want to ask you on Menti is, what non-traditional cross-sector career paths are emerging that require engineering expertise? So we're thinking about something that is requires engineering expertise, but it's a relatively new career in the industry. What do you see? Or what career should engineers be, be thinking about, engineering graduates? I bet maybe that's not the easiest question, I suppose, but maybe even seeing, where you see engineers needing to branch out perhaps from a traditional civil engineering career, what kind of other roles are emerging for them? Service design process. Okay. We've been talking about diplomacy, finance, policy. Yes, yes. Climate finance, absolutely. Science, technology, communication, MBS. Yeah, we talked about MBS and ecology. Just some thinking. Yeah, so many more things. Nidhi talked about social impact. In fact, that's kind of you got there. Community design. Yes, so many more things that engineers should be at least conversant with, and then perhaps decide to kind of branch out. I do know plenty of professionals that trained civil engineers and then kind of branched out to many of these different areas that greatly benefited from the fact that they are from their technical background and that solution-oriented mindset that Nidhi was talking about. Great. Thank you for sharing this verification credibility, interesting circular infrastructure. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this. Of course, every input is diligently, recorded, and it will be obviously inform the analysis and the consolidation and everything that we've been talking about in all sessions. Right. So now, without any further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jason Blackstock. Jason, it is such a pleasure to have you today. You're just a few words on you. Jason is the founder and CEO of How to Change the World, which is a social enterprise that spun out of University College London. I'm sure you'll tell us a little bit about this, and then but in How to Change the World designs and delivers experiential, purpose-driven learning programs to solve global challenges, which is, it sounds like absolutely spot on the topic that we want to be talking about today. I'll just put your bio in the chat because you got such an interesting bio. I could just spend the next 10 minutes talking about this, but over to you.
A little bit of professional schizophrenia across the bio and all the things that I've done. Savina, it's a real pleasure to be here. And I was glad to be able to catch Nidhi's conversation. And it's great to see some familiar faces, Chris, James, and others. It's a pleasure to meet you. To kick off, I'm mostly going to do a case study, but I wanted to do just a little bit of framing of sort of the key takeaway to begin with. And the key takeaway, at least from my perspective, is that the future of learning is experiential and social. And this is driven by the fact that there's a convergence happening. The first, which I think Nidhi actually did a fantastic job of articulating, so I'm not going to spend much time on, is of societal and business needs. The needs that society has is for people who are able to dive in and tackle real problems. There's also, though, technology and knowledge trends, and I'll spend a little bit of time on to frame that, and also our understanding of how humans learn most effectively. And all of this is underpinning the case study of what we do with How to Change the World in our experiential learning programs. And Nidhi, Savina, you both used the words experiential learning a couple of times already, and it's certainly changing the face of formal education. But we're also seeing the fact that it's changing the face of lifelong learning and workforce learning as well. And so if you take nothing away from my talk, but this is the main punch slide. Everything else is building around this, and the case study is going into it. And I will say in this smaller room, if you do have any interjections or questions along the way, please don't hesitate to interrupt and ask any questions if there's something that you disagree with or want more on. Now, Nidhi already did a beautiful job of articulating the engineering challenges that we're facing. And this sort of summarizes the world in which engineers are working. It's not just a world in which it's how do you build the most effective bridge? How do you build a bridge that or a piece of infrastructure that just does what it's supposed to? It's how do you build it so that it's resilient? How do you build it so that the society around it, the economy around it is inclusive? And that requires engineers, as Nidhi well articulated, to be able to work across sectors and communicate across boundaries they've never had to before. And a key piece of that is learning different languages. And I'll just use this as an articulation. I'll come to the case study in a minute, but we run programs where we have students from dozens of not just universities, but countries working together with each other across borders. And we find routinely the hardest cultures to bridge the gap between are not human cultures or geography. It's engineers talking to business students, talking to humanities students. because we've siloed them so well in their own technical languages of disciplines that we've broken down their ability to communicate even when they speak the same language. And so that is one of the main things. And that gets to the next piece of framing that I wanted to provide, which is around the knowledge landscape has changed. This is just one simple way of articulating it from 65 to 2025. But the models of formal education, as we think about them, generally haven't changed that much. We've built bigger lecture theaters. We still have broadcast modes of MOOCs. But one of the things we run roundtables, as some of you on the screen have participated in and engaged in, where we have leaders from higher ed from around the world, and they're asking themselves the question, why should I have an assistant professor give a lecture for 90 minutes when my students are just going to look up the MIT professor who's done this already, feed it into Gemini or ChatGPT, and get a better summary than they could, and then have a personal learning coach on what they need to learn? The mental model of what it means to learn today is changing because of technology as well, and also because of our understanding of how people learn. Now, this is a bit of data. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but happy to answer questions about it later. Gallup, though, has done a phenomenal job surveying tens of thousands of people over a decade now. And they basically looked at different stages of life and asked them, in university, did you get these experiences? And the 3 of the 6 experiences they ask about are all about experiential learning, which boils down to, did you have an opportunity to take the knowledge you were using in the classroom and apply it to messy real world problems somehow, whether it's through an internship or job, a project across the semester, extracurricular activities? And the data is astonishing. Students that had these types of opportunities in college 10, 20, 30 years later, they have a 20 to 30% increase in well-being if they had just one of those experiences, and they are cumulative if you had more than one. And in terms of workplace engagement, it's 60 to 80% more engaged in work. Now, this is showing us something about the science of learning, and there's a whole bunch of science of learning I'm not going to go through, but it gets to one of the things that actually showed up in the a piece of data you were showing, Savina, early on in that engineering change survey. People who are engaging in sustainable development get more of a sense of purpose and satisfaction in their work. Well, students who are engaging in these sorts of processes are driven by a sense of more purpose, more satisfaction, more connection, and it's actually firing different neurochemicals. It's not the neurochemicals that you get in your brain that's just associated with doing a test, fire and forget. It's associated with the positive neurochemicals that drive real learning. And I want you to just think for a second, if you had to name your most powerful 3 memories, just think for a second about what they would be. And I would bet good money each of your 3 would have one thing in common: a strong emotional response associated with that memory, positive or negative. And that's one of the things that we often forget when we're talking about learning experiences. We think about learning about content. What's the content we're giving? But what actually drives how much people learn and retain is the affective component as much as it's the cognitive component. In other words, the experience around the content that they're learning. Now, we know this stuff, but yet this is a sad punchline of the Gallup data. Of all of the students out there, less than a third get even one of those experiences in their educational opportunities on average, and only 6% get all 3. And that says something about we have not built and operationalized experiential learning to be scalable and impactful. And there's a bunch of reasons for it, and I'm not going to go through that, but that's the setup for the case study. So let me, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to raise your hands and dive in. But I'll now very quickly go through the case study of the modestly entitled How to Change the World, where it came from and where we are today. It started at University College London. So I joined UCL 12 going on 13 years ago now to be the founding head of an academic department, and built a department. We did a whole bunch of master's, doctoral, et cetera. But I was asked early on by 3 deans could you create a course that would allow students to work together in highly interdisciplinary teams, breaking down some of those silos, on messy real world problems? It goes to that top thing that came out in our Mentimeter survey, the lack of real world experience. Because even UCL is a top 10 global university, they're like, great, our students are technically brilliant, but they don't have professional experience. They're too siloed. So could you run one course that would address that? And I said, yes, I'd love to do that. And I was too cocky, too fast, because they looked at me and said, great, we only need you to do it for 1,500 students at a time. Oh, right. And the new resources, well, there's none of that because we're a university. So you just have to figure out how to do it. And so we went back to the drawing board, and for a couple of years, we ran some experiments with several hundred students at a time. I can tell you, I could do a 3-hour talk on what not to do when trying to do scalable experiential learning, but we discovered some of the things that actually worked well. And long story short, by 2016, this How to Change the World experiential learning course not only succeeded with 1,500 students, it became a required capstone for every engineering degree, every business degree, every computer science degree at UCL. Still runs to this day for 1,500 students a year. Now, in addition to that, though, we started to get visibility because of how successful the program was with places like the Royal Academy of Engineering and the National Academy in the US. And they said, could you do versions for our young global leaders? So we ran a version at the 2017 Global Grand Challenges Summit in DC, other ones in here in London. And that led to other universities asking us to do versions of it. And we realized this really has the potential to have a lot of impact. So by 2018, we were working with about a dozen other universities, and my faculty lovingly reminded me they had day jobs. So we had to spin out a social enterprise in order to keep up with the demand. So we did that in 2019. And then COVID happened. And in COVID, before COVID, we were still running the programs, bringing students physically together and only using virtual technology to connect to the societal problem owners. And I'll just say the basic framework here is these 1,500 students in teams of 5 and cohorts of 100 would be given messy real-world sustainability challenges in real-world communities, engaging with the stakeholders, talking to them about how anything from air pollution to transportation to healthcare to education was playing out, and what unique skills and passions could they bring to bear. Now, when COVID happened, our 18 going on 20 partners, places like Waterloo, Imperial College London, others, said, could you do it fully virtual? And we said, we'll give it a try. I was skeptical. And yet, when we did take it online, we actually found we started getting as good and better student learning outcomes than in person. And across 20, 21, and 22, we went from doing small extracurricular to larger multi-university credit-bearing courses to try and dig in and understand why. And it came down to one thing more than anything else. In an online environment, we can expose students to an order of magnitude more diversity. Diversity of other students they are working with, diversity of the teaching team we engage them with, diversity of the mentors we bring from around the world. And James, I'm not going to put you on the spot, but you've had the opportunity to give talks to these audiences, like to these students, and engage with some of them and talk to them at the end of these programs. So I'll throw it to you in case at the end you want to add any reflections from your experience there. But this allowed us to realize in an online environment, we could not only provide a better learning experience, we could do it at a fraction of the cost, much less carbon cost and much less cost in terms of traveling, which makes it more affordable and accessible while being more effective. So these are the types of programs that we run. Just an example, we ran one of our extracurricular boot camps, a 3-day program just a couple of weeks ago. We had students from over 30 universities across more than 20 countries. We had over 100 industry mentors and community representatives who engaged with the students throughout the process. And this is just an example of their work. You'll get the slides afterwards, so you can also access the QR codes there. But the process that they go through is grounded in human-centric design thinking, systems thinking, but also developing the skills of interdisciplinary, intercultural communications. I'm not going to go through all the pedagogy right now, but feel free to ask any questions. But you can see a couple of the quotes. especially from engineers, we've seen a lot of our engineering students who go through this inspired to take a different approach to engineering, different career tracks, whether it's becoming an entrepreneur or joining the government or doing a sustainable master's program at MIT. And most of the things, I'll just share one statistic from UCL because we had the Institute of Education there, which means they descended on us with clipboards every time we ran this and did a whole bunch of research. And one of the questions that has always stood in my mind, UCL doesn't do bad at getting young women into engineering. It's about 40% of the population, or it was a decade and a bit ago when we were doing, or a decade ago when we were doing this. And when interviewed, though, before How to Change the World, young men said about 65 to 70% of them were going to go on to become professional engineers. That was their career trajectory. For young women, it was only 30 to 40%. After How to Change the World, it was 80% for all of them, both. And the reason that was attributed is basically the statement, I didn't know an engineer had a role in refugee camps. I didn't know an engineer could play a role in government policy. I didn't know an engineer could fill in the blank. And that's a big part of the exposure that comes only from working on messy real world problems. It's not case studies in the classroom. It's getting engaged actively. And that's what we do now. We focus on the global scaling of mass experiential learning. And there's a white paper that we've written that has some of the data on this and some of the information. But it all comes back to this. From my perspective, what we have found is that students today, especially driven by technology and knowledge trends, are hungry for experiences. And in fact, we're starting to find that with corporate partners we're engaged. All those mentors who are coming to our programs as industry partners have been saying, this is great for those students, but I have a whole team, or I have a whole business that needs this as well. And we're seeing that the future of lifelong and workforce learning is similarly around crafting experiential learning opportunities that isn't just theoretical. It's not a case study. It's here's a real messy problem and here's a curated framework for how to go through it that you get coached and guided through. And it turns out it's also generating a huge amount of value for the communities we engage, because those communities are getting a whole swarm of ideas as a result of the processes that we run. Let me pause there because I want to be respectful of time and would love for those of you that haven't connected with to connect with.
Thank you, Jason. Amazing presentation. I always get inspired by your presentation. Thank you. Right, so we are running a little bit behind time, but I do want to give an opportunity for a couple of questions. I do have one for you, Jason, and please put more questions as you think of them in the chat. But from Liz, question for you, Jason, is how does the How to Change the World program compare to the increasing interest in problem-oriented hackathons?
Elizabeth, that's a great question. And let me summarize that by giving a definition of experiential learning and differentiating that from learning from experience. Experiential learning is learning by doing with clear learning outcomes and educational scaffolding that helps you achieve those learning outcomes. The vast majority of problem-oriented hackathons I've seen are better described as learning from experience, because there aren't clear learning outcomes associated with them. They're oriented around just getting solutions coming out the other side, but they're not designed in a way that is meant for the individuals going through the process to get clear learning outcomes and takeaways that they can then go and apply outside of that hackathon. And so that's the difference in my mind. Don't get me wrong, I love hackathons, and some of them do pieces of that. But what we built at UCL and what we see in the best versions of experiential learning out there is the first thing you look at is, at the end of this experience, you're going to blah, 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 whatever that is, whatever skills, whatever mindsets, whatever competencies or capabilities are going to be developed. And then everything in the experience is oriented towards helping you develop those in some ways. Whereas a good hackathon can just be a heck of a lot of fun and you might learn something. But I also compare this with the best internships that are out there. The best internship programs are one where you have clear connection between the internship you're doing and what you've been studying and how it's helping you with learning objectives, as opposed to it's just some experience in the workforce and you might be photocopying stuff or getting coffee and it might not be connected to your engineering degree. And that's the difference between experiential learning versus learning from experience.
Thank you, Jason. And we've got actually a couple more questions for you. And since our other presenter had to leave, she obviously was at the airport. If you wouldn't mind answering a couple more questions from Christine Nescaise. She's asking, what ways do the students receive constructive feedback on the solutions they generate?
Great question. And Chrissy, I will answer that in a few ways. First, in our multi-university credit-bearing course, and that runs over a term, or if it's a 2-week or a 4-week intensive, then there's all sorts of very formal individual assignments, group assignments, and the final product. And there's all sorts of formal assessment rubrics that go along with it. But whether it's the credit-bearing course or a 3-day boot camp that is where there isn't the time for those sort of iterative components, we have multiple ways of creating peer-to-peer feedback, near-peer feedback, and then at the end of all of them, there's always a Dragon's Den process where it's the mentors and community representatives who review the work they've done, ask the students question about it, give them written feedback at the end, and that's to ensure it's not just academic feedback. It's not just how well did you do against a rubric, which is important. The rubrics help with that learning process, but it's also what do people in the real world think of the work that you've done, and where would they look at it and go, yeah, you may have gotten an A, but you wouldn't actually get the funding to do this, and here's why. And those are the sorts of things that it has to be that balance of real world perspectives plus a rubric that helps them put that in perspective for themselves.
Thanks, Jason. And then another one that I find super interesting, actually, in this day and age of doing online experiential learning, how much does that limit the sort of the emotional aspect, right? Do you actually create that connection, emotional connection to the experience?
Joseph, that is a great question. And it was the thing back in 2020 when we were running our first program with Waterloo and Toronto and McGill. I was utterly skeptical. I'm like, we're not going to get that much connection. Wow, have I been proven wrong? We actually find in many ways we get as good and in some ways deeper connections precisely because we have to curate the interactions much more consciously in an online environment than we had to in person. In person, it was, you saw the picture, sit them at a table together and that'll be good enough. In an online environment, actually, we're much more conscious about how we have the near peers. So I've referred to near peers. When we run this program, I'll just use the November program. We had a couple hundred students from across all these different institutions and countries. We had a teaching team of 18 people, 16 of whom were graduates of previous programs that we put through a train the trainer, near peers who've been through it. And what we've actually found is we've had to create our own tech stack to do this. If you can get the technology to melt in the background, and you just focus on the human-to-human conversations, you still get most of the important pieces of the human-to-human connection. And the fact that you can have it with, on any one screen, we'll have a student from Saudi Arabia, a student from the US, a student from Africa, a student from Singapore, all in a team together with near peers popping in from different countries and perspectives, and then mentors and advisors they're meeting with from all around the world. The social and emotional learning, I will never say, I don't think online experiential learning can and should ever replace in-person experiential learning, but there are things you can do online that you can't do in person, and there are things you can do in person that you can't do online. And we need to be leaning into the idea of both. And what we're seeing with education leaders, university leaders, is they're not looking for one experiential learning solution. They're like, I've got 4 years worth of lectures and I got to get rid of like 60% of it and replace it with experiential learning. I need I need multiple ways. I need every way I can find, plus ones we haven't figured out yet, to provide more active learning, experiential learning, peer-to-peer. And we see that amplifies different aspects of social and emotional learning, intercultural collaboration, interdisciplinary communications, those sorts of things. Joseph, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think you picked up on on many different things, including maybe a point raised by James on transformative learning. I'd like to maybe James, let's just expand on that topic in your breakout, because we want to get into the smaller groups to ask a question of the similar question to the audience, and get you to share your perspective, experiences, examples of courses or institutions that are already actually working in this sort of along these lines and in creating experiential learning or other ways that meets industry needs and so forth. So without further ado, let's break out. If you can say, Jason, that'd be great, because you probably have many more questions for you, and you can be probed further in the breakout. And then we will meet again in a few minutes. Welcome back, everyone. So they always flow, they always fly this the breakouts, and I always feel that we should be having more time. Anyway, great discussion. Thank you, everyone, for coming back. We just want to quickly share the key points or key insights from each group, and then we can draw the session to a close. So who was in the other group? Was it you, Katie? You can report out.
I wasn't actually.
Oh, with Gemma, of course, yes.
Sorry, I'm still trying to get hold of the whiteboard. So Virginia, if you're ready, you can go ahead.
I'm here. I have the whiteboard in front of me. So in group 1, we continued the discussion on the same topic. For the first question of how can industry and academia work together, we talked about what industry can provide to academia, and we agreed that that big problems, so real world problems by industry would be very useful for academia. Also, professors of practice, so practitioners who can teach future engineers. Also, we talked about upskilling professionals and providing micro-credentials to them. And also we talked about what is needed. So it's needed to change the culture within the industry and focus on revolutionizing the procurement process. Also, we talked about mindset change, tool set and skill set change, and the trust. So having the same language between the different disciplines. So basically, we continued the discussion that we had during the presentation.
Gina, Gemma, you ready to share maybe a few points from your discussion?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of how industry and academia can work together to better align education outcomes, we spoke about how internships could be considered as a requirement for graduating. And a couple of people mentioned the need for accreditation, not only from university, but also from industry associations, and exploring opportunities for accreditation beyond university. James thought that maybe a better question would be what outcomes are desired from academia and industry working together, rather than on how they can work together, because he noted that there are a lot of initiatives already where they do work together, but are we getting the outcomes that we desire from that? In terms of resources and support to better equip graduates, It was mentioned the managers need to be trained in providing experiences for graduate hires in order to apply the educational outcomes that they've learnt in university. Incentives can be provided for people to work in public sector, in municipalities, or to become sustainability ambassadors. And so there's a role of government there to provide those incentives. And not everyone has to go down the engineering firm pathway. Nidhi mentioned that it's important to manage the stereotype that civil engineers are only required in urban environments. And we spoke a bit about the needs that might be required in rural environments as well. And then in terms of some examples, how to change the world was obviously flagged in our discussion as well, and we all really enjoyed Jason's presentation on that. And Henry has added some examples from Duke here as well, so we can share these for those who want more details on that afterwards.
Great, thank you so much. I think we are probably ready to wrap up the session. I just wanted to remind you of the final session that we will have in a couple of weeks' time. We will have done an initial synthesis, I guess, of key learnings, and we will actually present, that's the intention, present a bit of a structure for a document that wants to be the outline, obviously, of this series in a way that we share with the wider world and beyond this group what was discussed, but also for others that have been part of the journey from the start to benefit from all the things that were discussed and the examples shared. I mean, that's kind of a key point of this learning hub, to create that peer support network and peer group of people that are happy to work together and address this topic of transforming engineering education, but also making sure that it's fit for the future. And is better linked to the industry, and creating. I think this is a point that came out quite strongly in our breakout. Is just how do we ensure that industry and academia, we create fora where we actually bring people from representing these two groups with others to support, and then have a much more frequent and much more structured exchange to ensure that we are not just reactive, but like proactively addressing the changes that are happening around us. So thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to share the 90 minutes with you, and we're really looking forward to seeing you at the final session of our webinar series.